Good morning, all. Welcome to our CEO Roundtable here at Telecom Exchange London, our inaugural event, co-located, of course, with DCD Converged Europe. And I'd like to welcome our audience, and of course, welcome our viewers on RCR Wireless TV and JSA TV. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited here today. We have a phenomenal panel. And talking about a topic that's on the minds of many here tonight. We're honored to have Mr. Erick Contag directly to my left. He's the president and COO of GlobeNet. Greg Cubbon is in the middle. He is the project manager for Infrastructure Solutions for Hibernia Networks. And to my far left, we have Petrie of CTO of LINX. So our topic today is network ITization, shaping the carrier future with NFV, open source, and SDN technologies, moving beyond the traditional carrier offerings. So we're talking here about the phenomenon of network ITization, as the phrase might be, bringing the NFV and open source SDN technologies to the network. And as new technologies continue to evolve, we have this open network virtualization strategies reshaping the telecom carrier ecosystem, something we love to talk about a lot at Telecom Exchange. And what are the new opportunities? What are the challenges? What can we predict for 2016? These are the questions that will be on the table today. Now, this is a roundtable, so whenever anyone in the audience has a question, we'd love to hear from you. For sure, the whole point of this is to give you this C-level access to the great carriers and internet exchanges here today with us. The ongoing shift to cloud services and mobile internet technologies is driving service providers and the suppliers to improve their efficiency and agility. And so our focus here is to explore how network virtualization can advance the carrier business model, enabling them to create network differentiated propositions for the provisioning of cloud networking, larger network as a service offerings, and cloud infrastructure services. All right, so for our purposes, shall we begin perhaps by defining what we're talking about with SDN? So software-defined networking is an architecture purporting to be dynamic, manageable, cost-effective, and adaptable, seeking to be suitable for the high bandwidth, dynamic nature of today's applications. So SDN architectures decouple network control and forwarding functions, enabling network control to become directly programmable and the underlying infrastructure to be abstracted from applications and network services. And then for network function virtualization, today's conversation, we can define it as a network architecture concept that uses the technology of IT virtualization to virtualize entire classes of network node functions into building blocks that may connect, that may chain together, or create communications services. So with all those definitions aside, let's get right to it. And first and foremost, and we'll start with Greg, how does your company, Hibernia Networks, prepare for or are currently engaging in these new or other carrier offerings?
Sure. So, I think to start off with, there's a lot of move to IT cloud in the business, and of course under every IT cloud there's actually, there's a real network sitting there, and this network, we're certainly seeing a lot of price pressure on the cost of bandwidth. So the price of bandwidth is dramatically going down, right, but yet we're seeing huge demand, so the growth of demand is continuing. Just in the transatlantic corridor alone, we're seeing 40% year-on-year growth, which means we've got a bit of a challenge there in that we've got to deliver far more, but we cannot allow our operational costs to continue to rise in line with delivering that increased bandwidth. So we've got to look at ways of managing cost, managing efficiency, and looking at how we can really streamline all of the processes. And I think that's very much where, for us as a carrier, SDN will fit. It will help us achieve far better efficiencies and far better economies. And that's very much where Hibernia is in the process. We're looking at our processes, we're looking at how we can kind of almost revolutionise the way in which we do business by moving things far more into automation, far more into new models and new ways of working to deliver these services. It's not just about SDN, it's about the whole SDN ecosystem. It's not just about throwing out some open flow switches with a central controller. You've got to look at the whole end-to-end flow of an order right the way through the system, right the way through the operational support side as well. I think where we have some advantages being a relatively small carrier is that we can be more agile. And so, you know, the large carriers with these enormous system stacks are going to struggle somewhat because they have such big changes to make. And I think this is where some of the small carriers will probably leapfrog some of the large carriers in the deployment of SDN.
Right, yeah. And for sure, the Hibernia network's reach is very complementary with GlobeNet's reach. I think together you guys kind of encompass the globe, right? So Eric, are you seeing the same things from South America's standpoint?
Yes, just to add a little bit of color to what Greg was saying, I mean, we all own and operate also a subsea network. Actually, both of our companies were sister companies way back when, in the 360 days. And we have somewhat of an advantage that I like to really take, look at every time we deploy something in Latin America. And that is that from a technology adoption curve, we're, say, 2 or 3 years behind what happens, let's say, in the US, what happens in Europe. And so we can see the evolution of technology. And then typically what we like to do is we like to tropicalize it. So how do we adapt it to perhaps a market that is not so advanced? But basically the same principles that Greg was describing are the ones that let's say, that we're looking at. So you're looking at efficiencies, you're looking at how to do things better, how to make it easier for customers. People are starting to ask for bandwidth on demand. Where it gets complicated is we have a very sophisticated customer, let's say, that is used to buying advanced services between, let's say, the US and Europe, and the same type of service is not available in Latin America. The networks are not quite there yet. So we take on a slight different approach. First is we watch. We try to gauge the market, see what's going on. But then on the other side is we have to deal very clearly with our local providers in each one of the countries who themselves are in a different evolutionary phase. We try to push them. We did something similar to this years ago when GlobeNet became the first international subsea provider in our area to offer carrier Ethernet services. So we got certified, and then we went to the access providers in the countries and backhaul providers, and we pushed them to also have a common standard product. And then that way, when the network's interconnected, there's things that we could do because we were based on a standard that before we couldn't. And we believe that that this is the same type of trend and the same type of strategy that we're going to adopt in our area at the right time.
And Richard, from London's internet peering fabric operator perspective,
yeah, I mean, we as far as preparing, we have a slightly different business model, obviously, to GlobeNet and Hibernia, but very similar stories. It's about cost management, agility. We're not having to change to deliver new products, but we are having to change to deliver more capacity to the membership. So LINX's network is very much a service provider to service providers and content providers, connecting everybody together. I would say we've probably already been looking at SDN for a number of years. We've launched internally solutions that are SDN-like. As they've matured, they've sort of gone towards that. And I think our preparation is all about processes, making sure that the company is fit, the talent and the skills that we're bringing into the company over the next few years, and then just making sure that we invest in partners, proof of concept, lab testing, going through that, and making sure that actually the benefits that we want to get out is what our customers, our members want to realise. And
what do you see as driving these new offerings, Richard?
Well, it's about efficiencies and cost control from the LINX's point of view mainly. The internet keeps growing, as everyone I'm sure everyone's aware. Demand keeps growing. You know, in London itself, we connect across 10 different data centres, a seamless network. It's almost like a cloud exchange in itself. It connects over 15 terabits of capacity across London. And you know, what we see is demand, and we need to do more with less, you know, from staff and cost. And automation and the centralised approach that SDN brings is something that we feel over the next 2-3 years will give us those efficiencies.
And as the company that just brought us the World Cup, what do you see as drivers?
No, they're all very similar, and I think it's interesting depending on who you talk to, right? So we're approached by some of the world's largest carriers, and they all want things like self-provisioning. They want to be able to go in and make decisions on when they want services. They want bandwidth on demand. They want things like, hey, today I need a service into one area, and then tomorrow may have to switch to another area. So they want to see a little bit more of that, let's say, that agility. Right. But it's actually very complicated behind it. The easier to make it, let's say, to the end user, the harder it is on the back end. At least that's the way that we look at things. And if you look again at our area in itself, right, implementing those type of services for a large carrier that wants to buy in bulk, you know, sometimes works. But it's not only about the technology allowing a customer to get, let's say, bandwidth on demand or to self-provision services. You have to be tied in to the back-end OSSs and BSSs to do it. So, for example, if you look at a 10 gig wave across Atlantic that has a price of X, if you look at the same type of 10 gig wave into São Paulo, it's about 10 times X, right? If you look at it into Venezuela, it's even higher. If you look at it into Colombia, so there's a price differential per market. In some destinations, the backhaul in country is more expensive than the actual international link. And at the end of the day, what the customer wants is they don't care. They just want to say, hey, I want to go from A to Z. Here's my Z location. Here's my A location. So technically speaking, you can do it. We were actually, a couple weeks ago, I was participating in a demonstration that people were doing using SDN technologies and how they were setting up a network. And it was a live network in the United States and across multiple cities. The reality is that behind all that technology, you need to have infrastructure, right? It has to exist, right? So you need to provision 100 gig waves, 10 gig waves. You need to provision a whole mesh network. And then if you have the excess bandwidth, right, then you put the software on top of that, and then there's things that you can do. Right. But building out these networks is very, very expensive, and it takes a long time, right? So it all starts with a lot of upfront planning, right? Capacity planning is going to be critical. And that doesn't happen after the fact. That happens way before. On a subsea network, it could take you between a year and a half to upgrade a network, in particular one that touches multiple countries, right? If you don't have good capacity planning, you may find yourself in a situation where you're really running out of capacity. Then it doesn't matter what that software layer looks like, because the capacity is just not going to be there, right?
We were talking a lot about this last night over dinner, actually, the terminology infrastructure and what it means to different layers of our ecosystem, and how critical it is that the carriers are coming to the table with that capacity connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, as Eric was saying, we are getting to the age of the customer, where the customer is making all these demands on the network. And to allow this agility and flexibility, as Eric said, you've got to pre-provision all of this. You can't just say, you know, come along, you know, request a service online and it magically be there. Right. That infrastructure's got to exist. The wavelength plan's got to be laid out. Everything's got to be there to start with before they can start leveraging the use of the network. So it's about planning. It's about preparation. It's about getting everything in place up front. And you know, that's a tough thing to do for any carrier.
Right. And from a peering perspective and the telecom ecosystem, how do you see these offerings shifting the way you're doing business, Richard?
Well, I think it's already been mentioned, the self-service, the self-provisioning, insight into the network, you know, monitoring, all of these things. Once you put your systems in place, once you develop your BSS and OSS system, you can then enable visibility into your network, and you can enable, you know, our customers access into the tools so they can, you know, self-help. And I think from a LINX's point of view, our ethos is around, you know, enabling, you know, giving back to the customer and the member who invest in the network. And, you know, that's part of our story is when we develop these tools, it makes us more efficient, but then we also give those tools to the customer to benefit them.
Right.
Yeah. I think it goes further than that as well, is that it's not just the carrier to the customer, but it's also getting to the stage where it's going to be carrier to carrier.
Sure.
We're going to start leveraging each other's networks. We do that nowadays with NNIs. Well, now the next stage is probably that we're going to start looking at how we can leverage each other's SDN networks and start almost confederating the SDN story across different platforms and different carriers.
And I know, Eric, you've been talking about partnering for years now and the benefits of, so for sure you can see an SDN partnership future.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we do that already. As a matter of fact, with Hibernia, we set up an NNI and said, okay, you know, here it is, we're connected. Not send the salespeople out there and try to sell it. You know, that's a different story. But yes, you start, let's say you take some baby steps. I think, you know, Greg is right on. You know, if you have a smaller network and you're agile and you like to embrace technology, it's easier to, let's say, to implement. I think the type of challenges, let's say, that we have, despite the fact that we're both, let's say, subsea networks are very different than perhaps LINX. I mean, LINX is a different environment. It's a little bit in a smaller area, a little bit more controlled, but they have other, let's say, they have huge volumes, other challenges, etc. So you really need to tailor it to where you're at. You need to tailor it, let's say, to your market. But again, it's not just about connecting the infrastructure. It's connecting the software. It's connecting the billing systems. It's, you know, it's a huge process. And I think in some markets, people get excited because they think that they're going to be able to provision end-to-end services. I can see that, let's say, between data centers. I can see that between POPs. But then the moment you add the access part, then it really gets tricky, right? So we'll see. Right, if that ever happens, but it's getting there.
And I assume that would be one of the challenges you see of SDN in 2016, if you will. Access.
I think that's a little bit further out from our perspective.
2016 plus.
Yes.
And you know, I'm loving whenever we put together a roundtable. We love to get the different members of our ecosystem and what happens when you pull one string, how all the parts move. And looking down this table, we've got local and global ecosystems. And so from localization, local governments, principalities, how do you see, Richard, London, and then the pairing partners that spread globally for you? How are these new offerings impacting those local governments, principalities, in which you deliver service?
Well, I mean, LINX's history was it came out of the need to localise traffic in the UK. I mean, you know, back 20 odd years ago, all the traffic would sort of, you know, UK traffic would trombone through the US and come back, and so LINX came about from trying to keep traffic local. We've been true to that ever since, and we're very much about, you know, regional exchanges and local exchanges. So we launched an exchange a few years ago in Manchester to enable traffic to be, you know, kept in the north of England. We've got another exchange in Scotland, one in Wales, in Cardiff, and so we continue to promote this you know, keep traffic local. We build our infrastructures to be high capacity but very, very localized, and so we work with all the content providers, access providers, large enterprises as well. But we promote that to enable them to participate locally in the exchanges, keep traffic low. As I think we've already said, we try and enable tools that can you know, our providers can use the LINX exchange to do business with each other.
And GlobeNet's pairing fabric has a similar model, yeah? Keeping it, the traffic local?
Well, what we did is we actually took a different approach, I think, and we're just starting with this. We're looking more at a distributed model because of the type of the countries that, let's say, that we serve, right? And so there's different dynamics going on there. And in our case, what you'll find is a lot of, let's say, Latin American carriers, they're like, oh, we would love to peer. But we don't have two POPs, or who do we peer with, right? And they want to go to LINX, or they want to go to the Amsterdam Exchange, or to DKIX, or what have you, and they don't really know how to set it up, right? And in some cases, it's very difficult for them to do because of language, contracting terms, limitations imposed, let's say, by local governments, etc. And if you build, let's say, an infrastructure solution that makes it easy for them to virtually or remotely access the exchanges, then all of a sudden you satisfied their need without them having to establish those direct connections. And that's the foundation for Genix, right? And that's what we're trying to do. It's at the infancy stage, right? I think we'll never be a LINX. We'll partner with LINX. We just want to be the enabler, like the on-ramp to the exchange, and that's the way we're looking at it.
Right, and it's critical in the South American region where every country has its own set of rules, and it's not easy to create a business and get out access.
Well, it is. I mean, and if you look, for example, at Brazil, right, they're driving, let's say, this net neutrality, which means very, very different things in the Brazilian market than, let's say, net neutrality in the United States. Mm-hmm. In the United States, it's more about the access. In Brazil, what they're trying to do is they're more about, where's the content, who owns the content, what are the rights of the end user, and to some extent, let me protect that end user, when in reality, everybody's like saying, hey, wait a minute, why should I keep my emails in Brazil? I don't want the government snooping at my emails, right? So it's a complete different, let's say, discussion. And what happens there, or even in the case of Colombia, right, that many of the service providers, in particular the traditional telcos, have an investment, a government investment. And in order for them to establish an international presence, they pretty much need an act of Congress to get the approval to invest outside of the country. And that is very difficult for them to do. And so that's why we basically created 2 product sets to address exactly that niche. So one of them was network functions virtualization. And so everybody wants to be at the, let's say, the NAP of the Americas, they want to be at 60 Hudson, they like to be in London, they like to be in different locations, but they don't, they can't do it, right? And so what we said is, look, we have all the tools, we have the infrastructure, let's create a product, a virtual product for these people so that they can have a router, they can have presence, they can have interconnect, but it's not theirs, right? So we're offering that to them, and we just launched it. And the number 1 carrier in Colombia, for example, is super excited about it. They're our launch partner. Because they've been wanting to have a direct presence, let's say, at the NAP of the Americas and at 60 Hudson, and eventually in Europe, but they just didn't know how to do it.
Right.
So they sign a contract in Colombia, they pay for it in Colombia, and yet they're virtually present, let's say, at these other locations. So we just solved a problem that works great for them.
It's literally enabling the global marketplace.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's also on a more like a pay-as-you-go model. You don't need to put a big investment up front. You can actually take the service, you start subscribing, and as you want to grow your bandwidth, the elastic type service, it's there, it's available for you, and you can get into new markets, but at a very manageable cost base.
Yeah, and for sure, Hibernia network spreading from North America to being a Dublin-based company, and then going to Europe, and even access to Hong Kong, Singapore.
Absolutely.
You have a lot of experience in local government management. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Seeing the same stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So moving on to, where are the roadblocks that you guys see? So looking in that crystal ball, what do you see as stopping us with this new way of data management? Roadblocks, difficulty.
Complexity, I think. Complexity with the whole ecosystem. Yeah. I don't think there has been one true winner in the race to provide an SDN full end-to-end solution yet. I think there's a lot to be done there, and a lot to evolve that story, and I think over the next year or so we'll see, will it even still be called SDN? Will it evolve into something else? Yeah. Will there be, what will win? Will it be the most technically advanced solution that becomes the winner? Or will it be the one that's easiest to integrate, easiest to facilitate and make work? There's a lot of different things that are pushing against what will win. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of changes.
Right. Yeah.
Probably roadblocks. Complexity, clarity in the market. So most people that will approach this aren't going to approach it from a greenfield type approach. They're going to have an investment in a vendor, maybe multiple vendors. Not very many companies will completely open source at this stage. And so each vendor has their own roadmap about how they're going to embrace SDN and NFV. And some, once you've made an investment in that partner, in that vendor, you are somewhat locked into their roadmap, and so some of the difficulty would be, have you selected the right partner? Are they going in the same direction as your business is going in? And if you want to exit that and want to go more open source, how do you invest in the skills and the talent of the company to enable that?
It's a great point. Great point. You're locked in with a partner, and you don't see them being as aggressive as you need them to be, in particularly with your business needs. It's quite difficult. Eric, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I'm just going to wait for Richard and Greg to do their stuff. After that, we'll take advantage of
we have 3 years difference. We're going to watch what you do, and then we won't make those mistakes. Yeah, it's brilliant. So, okay, so let's talk. It's the close of 2015. Let's talk about the coming new year and multiple years, new year plus, 2016 plus. What do you see as predictions for these or other new carrier offerings and the opportunities that they may create? I'll start with Richard.
Okay, I mean, 2016, I mean, whether it'll be 2016, 2017, I mean, for LINX's benefit is really about, embracing open source and more of an agile approach. So we're engaging, as we do all the time, in research and development. We're starting to look at the sort of off-the-shelf switches, bare metal switches that are in the marketplace, and there's a lot of interesting aspects there about, could we embrace them, could we build them into our network, and then obviously can we run our own operating systems on there that get away from the traditional vendors and the traditional architecture. Could we actually do that in 2016, or is that something maybe more for 17? We'll see. But certainly we'll be making an investment in research, which will pay benefits in the years to come.
Yeah. Same story for Hibernia, really. I think, we're getting there. The whole SDN story is getting there. But, we've seen a number of carriers already with SDN stories out in the marketplace. Whether that's a full end-to-end SDN story or not, I think it's debatable. But I think there is certainly a move to some level of automation. From a Hibernia perspective, we're certainly looking at how we streamline processes, how we can adopt SDN, and looking at proof of concept activities. But yeah, I think 2016 might be ambitious. 2017, I think it's
our
more confidence.
Our year, 2017.
Yeah.
You gonna write it down? Sign it.
We see something similar, and I think what we're going to see in our market first is you're going to see deployment of new infrastructure first. Latin America, as I mentioned right at the beginning, we're slightly behind, let's say 2 or 3 years. There's many networks or terrestrial networks that are still using 2.5 gig technology rather than 10 gigs or 100 gigs. So they're just getting into, let's say, building bigger, stronger, more robust networks. That is also an advantage, because you put a new kit, automatically you can then go in and say, let's go from the beginning to deploy, let's say, new technology, new software, and other things. So 2016, lots of partnerships, new deployments, but I think we'll see the effect probably 3 years from now. That's my gut feel.
Yeah. Any questions from our audience? Yes, Tim Aker of COO X.
It's interesting to hear what you say about SDN, the flexibility it offering customers, but are your back-end system, Eric, you mentioned this, are your back-end systems able to keep up from a billing point of view? And also, what about from the customer point of view, like, can you offer new contracts and what have you? And actually also, will it open up opportunities? For example, if you have peaks in your traffic, can you offer cheaper bandwidth at certain times of the day? So will it affect the products going forward as well? It's kind of interesting. We thought maybe affect Richard perhaps less, but talking about you from the network carrier point of view.
I think it's a great question, and I believe if you happen to be in a certain area, like in the same country, and you don't have any, let's say, regulatory issues going, let's say, from state to state and stuff like that, it's going to work a lot easier, right? You can sign a master service agreement that can be part of your front end. You can have different service schedules, etc. Where it gets complicated is if you have different jurisdictions, or you have different taxes, or you have, let's say, you go across borders and so on, then the non-technical part is significantly harder to implement. let's say, than the technical side itself, right? I mean, self-provisioning has been around for a long time, but being able to do it in such a way that you can bill for it is, let's say, it's difficult, right? In our case, we have countries where you can bill the month in advance, right? So you give them 30 days, and by the time they pay, which is always a little bit late, but you're within, let's say, that 30 to 60 day window. There's others that by regulation, you have to bill in arrears, for example. So your entire billing platform needs to be adapted, not only to the product, but also to where it is that you sign the contract, where is it going to, are you taking care of the right taxes? In the United States, for example, you have the Universal Service Fund. If you're a carrier, you give me a certificate. Every year it needs to be updated. So you need to have a mechanism for all this paperwork to be running in parallel or almost in advance to what your technical solution looks like. So it's a challenge, right?
Sounds horrific. Sorry.
It is.
I mean, it's not just the billing, but it's also the troubleshooting as well. If you're allowing your customers to dynamically alter the network, you've got to have an extremely good audit trail to understand what should be pointing at what. You know, someone logs a fault and you want to go and understand where the problem lies. We've got to understand what services they've self-provisioned. So everything, you know, every step of the way has to be really well audited.
Quite a nightmare, for sure. Yes?
Yeah, hi, Dean Sheffield from Big Switch. I've been noticing that SDN's kind of bucketized into SDN for the WAN at the moment. I think you're hinting at it too, Greg, that there's SDN for the data center, SDN for other bits and pieces of the network, and with network functions that have been virtualized likely to exist in the data center, and obviously there's some criticality here with SDN for the WAN. Do you see one prioritised over the other, or are you looking for a combined solution? What are your sort of thoughts on this domain sort of thing we're seeing?
I don't think it's going to be focused on demand. I think it will eventually go completely horizontal, right the way from the core, right the way through to the customer edge. But, you know, it's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts there. There's a lot of different operators. You know, we've got the radio access networks, we've got the core, we've got the edge compute, we've got, you know, there's a lot of
domains.
It's right,
And the solution that I've seen is the concept, and I'd be interested in your opinion on it, the concept of a controller of controllers, where there's some kind of common interface where the controllers of each of those domains could have a master controller that could sit above all of that, which is kind of the most sensible way I see that being solved for. But what are the standards likely to be? You know, are they REST APIs, or what do you see? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, so where we've come from in the network business is we've come from multi-protocol networks where everything's been distributed and we've had routing tables and everything's updated from everything else. A lot of these networks have been very much handcrafted by very experienced engineers over the years, and everything's been built up, and we have some very intelligent engineering staff out there, and we now want to give that to something that's going to automate it all and have one central controller. You know, that's the risk. But so you know, having some sort of centralized control and some confederation between those controllers is absolutely necessary. It's going to happen. It's going to get there, but I think it's not going to be one central controller. I think there will still be very much a distributed messaging layer and everything simplified much more than it is now, but it will never be simple that there's a pure hierarchy in one controller.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you.
Richard, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that. Yeah, the controller of controllers approach. I think there's been some presentations over the last year on that. There's probably, you know, the need to orchestrate across multiple systems means that certainly we would approach it more of bringing the skills in house to do that orchestration with our own system development, as opposed to buying in a controller of controllers. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure 5 years from now there'll be those solutions. It's, you know, each business has a slightly different need, and trying to get one controller that can cover everything is going to be difficult in the short term.
Right. Good question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? All right, any other comments or concluding thoughts? No?
No.
All right, well.
It's going to be fun.
It's all right. And thank you for joining our very first inaugural